Welcome to another episode of Conduct Detrimental. Dan Lust, Dan Wallace. We are back on the grind. Dan, how's it going, my friend?
It's going well, Dan. Nice to be back with you. A nice little string of co-hosting gigs with you. A couple of weeks in a row. We're getting into our groove. And another big week, both sports law and ice hockey and fantasy sports.
And also just like real law, we had the Johnny Depp verdict that came in right before you about to record. So I think we had some nice R&R over Memorial Day weekend. I had some big family reunion up in the Berkshires. You can tell I'm a little bit hoarse, a lot of screaming, a lot of chasing little kids around, which was always fun. And Dan, how about yourself? You do anything fun over Memorial Day weekend?
What any New York Ranger fan who's worth their salt is going to do, which is watch Game 7 on Memorial Day evening. The Rangers won on the road against the Carolina Hurricanes, advancing to the Stanley Cup Conference Finals, which just blew my mind. That was everything around my Memorial Day. I was solely focused on that game, and I came very close to pulling the trigger and going to Raleigh-Durham to watch the game. I wish I had. There were a lot of Ranger fans in attendance. Unfortunately, not me, but it was just such an amazing thing to see this team advance after having not been in the playoffs and being basically underrated by so many people, probably including by myself.
I'm pointing at you for those. We're not putting the video out, but I'm pointing at you, Dan, because privately you picked Pittsburgh to beat the Rangers. You picked Carolina to beat the Rangers. So, Dan, it's only fitting that you picked Tampa this time around. I think that's what's deserving. We need to give the Rangers all the luck we can here. You got to pick against them.
Well, of course I will, but that's why you play the games. I'm going to root for the Rangers. I think they have a shot to beat Tampa. But going into this, the Rangers had not really had any kind of experience as a team, at least this group, playing together in the playoffs. And I've always been of the view that it takes a couple of years of failure and being knocked down and learning what it takes to win in the playoffs before you can advance on. Tampa went through that. The great New York Islanders teams went through that. And I just thought the experience difference between Pittsburgh and the Rangers and Carolina and the Rangers in terms of previous playoff experience was going to make all the difference. What I didn't factor in was that the Rangers imported so many players with like an experienced winning pedigree, guys like Barclay Goodrow, Tyler Mott, Andrew Kopp, Justin Braun, who played over 100 playoff games with San Jose. They brought in a lot of guys with experience that I think added a dimension to the room to overcome the lack of experience.
Well, Dan, congrats to the Rangers. Congrats to the Celtics. Congrats to the Warriors. Those guys are playing in the finals. I watched that game over Memorial Day weekend. But Dan, I kicked off my Memorial Day weekend on that Friday. I watched basically, hopefully my boss is not listening, but I watched a lot of those closing arguments on Friday, the Johnny Depp case. So we want to do this episode. We want to talk first, just because it's topical. We want to talk the Johnny Depp verdict that just came in. We're going to break down a compensatory, punitive, counterclaim, a little bit of the closing arguments, and how basically the lawyer's comments resulted in Johnny Depp being held in on a $2 million counterclaim. We'll talk about that. 3 topics we want to cover on the sports law front. Deshaun Watson, the 23rd accuser there now, claims seemingly about to trickle in sex trafficking. So, hopefully people are following the twists and turns of this Watson saga as we get close to a suspension. We'll talk about that. Dan Snyder now called to testify in front of Capitol Hill. We'll talk about that. And a story that broke at the end of last week that I had a lot of fun covering as a San Francisco Giants fan. Joc Pedersen, Pham, the slap heard round the fantasy football world. And all of a sudden, Mike Trout is involved in that story. So we'll break that down. And then just a quick footnote. We covered the Jerry Jeudy criminal case a couple of weeks ago, I guess, or maybe last week on the podcast. That Jerry Jeudy case, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, has been dismissed by the DA over there. Quote from the DA: after reviewing the evidence, I always believed that no crime had been committed and all charges would be dismissed. That's according to Harvey Steinberg. So we'll see if there's a suspension on Jerry Jeudy, but that case, we're not going to cover it because those charges no longer exist. So Dan, I guess we'll start over in the real non-sports law world. Let's start with Johnny Depp. So I have my thoughts, but Dan, I texted you, the verdict. I'm happy I broke the news to you. And you had a pretty strong reaction to the verdict. So I'll let you start. I have my thoughts on the closings, but the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, I think the judge in this case blew it by agreeing or allowing the proceedings to be televised, right? I mean, these are allegations surrounding or at least evidence about alleged sexual and domestic violence. And in a case of this level of sensitivity about the sort of the private, lives of two well-known, Hollywood film actors, but more importantly, the allegations involved, whether there was, any truth to the domestic abuse allegations, that should never have seen a television camera. And she lost control of the proceedings because while that provided a lot of juicy information to come out and be commented upon on social media, Twitter, TikTok, I think it was really unfair to Amber Heard, because how could you expect the jury that goes home at night to completely, just observe a media blackout, and not take a look at TikTok and Instagram and see the barrage or the one-sidedness of the invective directed against Amber Heard? So if you're a juror and you want to find out what's going on in the case, what the public opinion is, you must be questioning your own thought process if you think Amber Heard is winning the case, because it was so decidedly against Amber Heard that I don't know if it rises to the level of depriving her of a right to a fair trial, but the judge should never have allowed it. That allowed the circus atmosphere to pervade the trial. And I think it led to this excessive and incessant amount of online bullying. And it was almost like the demonization of Amber Heard, and Depp's lawyers are not innocent in this regard either. They were very disrespectful. The cross-examination of Heard by Ms. Vasquez, I was offended by. Just sort of she was very mean-spirited and almost bullying-like. And as a judge, I want to get one last point in. The judge lost control of the trial. She was like a potted plant, and no judge should ever have allowed something like a circus atmosphere like this to have occurred. No television, and certainly I would have reined the lawyers in with some of the face making, the hugs, the playing to the audience. Just unacceptable.
I watched first week of the trial, then I was catching recaps, but I tried to watch everything of the closing. I guess let's start just to respond to your comments. I mean, if you read the comments on social media, I think people assume that Johnny Depp was like, if we're sports betting people here, like the minus 600, 900 favorite, like the overwhelming favorite to win. But at the end of the day, this was a case that required a showing of actual malice, which and you and I have spoke about it on the show before. That's very hard to prove. So, if I was scoring this, we never covered in the pod beforehand, but it was telling people, over the weekend when the jury was deliberating, I'm like, I don't know, minus 120, minus 150. I think Depp should be favored here just because I've watched the case fairly closely, but it's certainly not like an overwhelming favorite. The only thing I'll add, Dan, I watched, I think obviously social media was very much one-sided. Someone, Matt Timpanic, who's, obviously appeared as on a show before and gave commentary. He once in a while would say when Amber Heard's lawyers, he would go on Law and Crime and different shows, and he would say when Amber Heard's lawyers did a good job, on various points, cross whatever they were doing, he would just get like attacked. And I didn't think that was fair, because I watched the trial, and the lawyers for both sides are very well credentialed. Obviously, they've done good things in their career, have nothing to do with this case. So it's not really, we can make fun of Amber Heard's lawyers when they're objecting to their own question. Obviously, no one's perfect. People are going to make mistakes. But, I didn't think it was fair that the lawyers are getting criticized at every level. Yeah. So the only thing I want to add, and then, I can get back to you. I think on closing, I watched very closely. I think the big mistake, on closing, I heard that I made a note of this, I figured we would cover it in the show. Amber Heard's lawyers basically said, if you believe, any instance of assault, we win our case. So all these different acts of, aggression and whatever else that occurred over, their marriage or the relationship together, if you believe one of those, then we win. And I don't, again, I think that on its face, it's like, well, obviously, there's so many of these, but it's set, so I guess here's where the mistake I think was made. It was really time management. So if anybody's watching, I watched the closing very closely. 2 hours were allotted for closing on each side. And Amber Heard's lawyers spent an hour and 54 minutes on the first round of closing. And Johnny Depp's lawyers spent, I think it was like an hour 20, an hour 25. So on rebuttal, Johnny Depp's lawyers got 36 minutes and Amber Heard's lawyers got only 6 minutes on rebuttal. So Johnny Depp's lawyers really phrased, and they took that statement that is, one instance of assault, and Johnny Depp's lawyers teed it up. Do you think that Amber Heard is the type of person who would make everything up? And they really took the best punch that Amber Heard's lawyers could bring, and they took 36 minutes to spin it on her. And Amber Heard's lawyers really had 6 minutes to throw together some type of rebuttal in closing. So, that's the last things that the jury heard. So I thought Johnny Depp was going to win. I just didn't think it was this overwhelming impossibility that that he was going to lose.
Yeah, but he lost a defamation case filed in the UK. A newspaper accused him of good domestic violence. He's sued for defamation. He lost in the UK, loses against a media publication, but wins against his ex-wife for publishing a newspaper article. So where do you see how do you harmonize those two seemingly inconsistent results?
I got to give you the quote. Speaking of things that were lost on, I don't know. You can't. I mean, juries are unpredictable. I think that's the saying in the biz,
that's
right?
For sure.
You don't know what they're going to do, and I think you and I will call just call it like we see it. I think if the jury had decided against Johnny Depp in their entirety, right? Obviously, we should talk about what this is, right? $15 million awarded to Johnny Depp, $10 million in compensatory, $5 million in punitives. On the counterclaim, Amber Heard wins $2 million in compensatory, $0 in the punitive. My wife called me right after the verdict came out, and she goes, "How does Johnny Depp get 10 and Amber Heard gets 2?" And I'm like, "Well, Johnny Depp makes a lot more money than Amber Heard, so that's probably the easiest explanation for it." But I think they tried to split the baby in the best way they could, but on a compensatory level, there's no way the numbers are going to get close. So I'm going to read the quote just so we should focus on this part. So how did Johnny Depp lose the $2 million counterclaim? It was a quote actually by Johnny Depp's lawyer, which, that it's not a statement by Johnny Depp. So Johnny Depp didn't say anything that was ruled to be defamatory. This is the quote that Johnny Depp's lawyer, Waldman, gave to, I think it was the Daily Mail. Quote, "Quite simply, this was an ambush, a hoax. They set Mr. Depp up by calling the cops, but the first attempt didn't do the trick. The officers came to the penthouses, thoroughly searched and interviewed, and left after seeing no damage to face or property. So Amber and her friends spilled a little wine, roughed the place up, got their story straight under the direction of a lawyer and publicist, and placed a call to 911. So I don't know what exactly the jury felt was defamatory within that statement, but again, viewed with actual malice. But that's it. It's not a statement made by Depp. It's one made by his attorney. And I guess they had to view that as an agent of Johnny Depp. So Depp basically, he emerged here kind of unscathed.
Well, it's not quite over. There will undoubtedly be appeals, but before the appeals, the judge will be receiving, or I guess have to decide motions for judgment notwithstanding the verdict, motions for new trial, and also motions for remittiture, which is a reduction of the monetary damages award. So it's quite possible that the disparity between what Amber Heard got in damages and what Depp was awarded in damages might be narrowed a little bit more. But I think there's going to be a long life to this litigation post-trial. It probably won't be finally resolved until after the last appeals court decides the last issue, which could be a few years away. But for Depp's purposes, he got a victory just by having this trial televised and by having this sort of mob, just favor him so decisively and be just sort of demeaning, and just the treatment towards Amber Heard's lawyers and to Amber Heard herself, I think accomplished everything that Johnny Depp would have hoped for. He won this case the moment the judge made the improvident decision to televise it. And I don't know if that's a grounds for appeal, but that's largely why his career and his image have been rehabilitated, because it was televised. If this occurred in a normal federal court case without any reporting other than sort of courthouse insiders, it would have lost that, the testimony and the actions wouldn't have resonated quite the same way as, hundreds of millions watching it live in real time were able to divine from it. So that's the moment he won the case, because he projected much better than Amber Heard did, but that doesn't mean she deserved to be on the losing side of a defamation lawsuit. So I really question the wisdom of that decision. It was just an awful, ill-advised, improvident decision by a trial judge, given what occurred here over social media and the near certainty that many jurors probably took a quick peek at what was happening on the internet.
Right. I imagine everybody was watching it. And also outside the courtroom, if you kind of looked around, there were spectators, will say, wearing pirate hats. There were cheers emanating from outside once people were kind of following the case. So, it is what it is, Dan. It's not the first big case to be televised like that.
It was the first one where a woman who made credible allegations, where they're both involved in just this horrible marriage.
Right.
And it was the demonization of Amber Heard and the canonization of Johnny Depp. And something about that just offends my sensibilities. I think they should have been left in the same place where they started, a 6-week trial over, what film projects they lost in front of jurors who have to slog this out for 6 weeks. I would have left them even Steven exactly where they started.
Well, Dan, again, unpredictability of juries, but we'll leave it there. They both issued statements. Depp is happy. Amber Heard is heartbroken. And we can leave it there. We'll see what the appeals take on this case. Okay, Dan, let's move over to our sports docket. Deshaun Watson, Dan Snyder, Joc Pedersen. Dan, let's start with Deshaun Watson. The big news, again, kind of another cycle. Want to give credit to Tony Busby, want to place blame on him. A 23rd lawsuit has been filed against Deshaun Watson, again, and still represented by Tony Busby. This is another accuser who, after watching the HBO Sports special on Deshaun Watson, basically decided that she was also going to file charges. And she commented that she appreciated the strength of the other accuser. So just kind of leaving it there. So what's new about this? I guess the big highlight from the petition, people want to latch on to anything here. I think on a previous podcast, and we spoke about how Deshaun Watson would bring the allegations that he would bring his own towels to these massages. I don't know if that's weird, not weird, but it was the big thing. The one that has made the rounds on social media is the allegation here that Deshaun Watson refused to let the masseuse leave the room while he changed. I don't know why one would need to do that. And the allegation specifically with respect to Watson is that this 23rd accuser wanted to massage Watson's legs. She's claiming that Watson exclusively wanted his buttocks massaged. So that's the allegation that's out here. The other part of this, which we'll see if maybe launches into another portion of these lawsuits, one of the massage therapy places here has claimed that they were aware of Watson's propensity and were brokered, I think, 3 masseuses to Watson and received some type of compensation. So we'll see if there's another party added to this lawsuit. Dan, I think the timing is conspicuous, obviously, as a suspension looms for Watson. That's, I think they're angling maybe for June, July, August, but I think the timing is suspect. But Dan, are you getting Watson fatigue over here? I think I can see it in your face.
Definitely. I mean, we've devoted probably 8 to 10 episodes in part to Deshaun Watson. And I think it is worth mentioning that with this new lawsuit, it does kind of underscore the danger for Watson to settle any of these cases, because if you settle 22 or 23 cases, you've got to be able to expect that nobody else is going to come out of the woodwork. And how could anyone be confident? How could Watson be confident that Tony Busby is currently representing every potential victim of Deshaun Watson? So unless you're entirely sure nobody else is out there, the risk of settling is that other alleged or potential victims are going to come out of the woodwork, because it's not a class action lawsuit where you're getting releases from any and all claims from anyone who potentially provided services between these dates. You're exposing yourself to further litigation. If you think you're settling 22 or 23, that might not put the cat back in the bag. That's the risk he faces.
Right. And we've said this. I mean, I tried to say it like these allegations that are coming out, this 23rd accuser, some of the stuff is new stuff that we have not known before. So that's why I think the NFL is trying to wait. But to your point, Dan, there is no time frame, that they're aware that another person's not going to come forward. And even if the statute of limitations passes somewhere down the road, it's not going to stop someone from speaking to an HBO or one of these outlets. So I think the NFL is set up to look like they are punishing Watson in too light of a manner, because we're going to find out more things afterwards. It's just my sense of it. And Dan, we talk about public trials, right? The trial for this case is set to take place after next year's Super Bowl. Could you imagine, let's say they give him an 8-game suspension, right? Which, I think some would view as being fair, an 8-game suspension, maybe a 10-game suspension, who knows?
Fair if he's innocent, but
I'm just saying, some would say he should get the full season, or I know there are some crazy people that are saying he should never play football again, which people have done bad things and have played football again. Not to say that one is right and one is wrong, but people have wide ranges here. But Dan, all I'll point out is that there could be a trial in this case like we had with Johnny Depp, right? And the same allegations that you and I have read in the petitions and we've known about for over a year, people are finding out about them because that same petition allegations, they're leaking in terms of deposition. They're not new allegations. People are just now saying them out loud. So if you're going to have a new news cycle when they're written on a complaint, when they're said in a deposition, and then they're said on the witness stand, then the NFL set up to look like they're being too lenient, because we're going to learn more after the suspension is rendered. So I think a Ray Rice situation is certainly looming here.
Well, Ray Rice is probably on the extreme end. While it's not 23 victims, it's 1 victim. The difference going from allegations to having video proof of his wife being assaulted in the elevator, obviously changed the dimension of the case. And from Watson's perspective, I mean, how do you settle with 23, not knowing how many more are going to come forward? And for the NFL, how do you punish Watson for this group of alleged incidents, and then have somebody else emerge and accuse him of similar conduct covering that relatively same time period. So maybe, as I said on the last podcast, it might be in Watson's interest to try to a negotiated resolution with the NFL for definite suspension of X number of games to basically cover, any of the allegations from all of these massage therapists. I mean, because until this closure here, this is going to be hanging over his head for the foreseeable future. And if this goes to trial, this could potentially undermine or compromise his 2023 season. So as I said last time, just take a suspension now, agree to 6 games or 8 games, whatever it is, whatever the NFL is willing to settle on, and have that be the definite length of the suspension, no matter what else emerges, provided that there's nothing so out of the realm, because you're just all you're doing here is empowering a civil litigator to game the system, to use the press, to use HBO, to use the news media to sort of, tighten the vice on Deshaun Watson and basically dictate what the NFL is going to do. If I'm the NFL, if I'm Watson, I don't let a private civil litigation attorney basically dictate and tell us how we're going to conduct our investigation or how many games we should suspend Watson. The league and Watson should basically undercut anything that Tony Buzbee could possibly be doing here and just agree on something. And at least moving forward, once you get past 2022, this is in the rearview mirror, at least in the NFL world.
Right. I guess the part that we have not addressed is the court of public opinion, right? So you can have the suspension issued, and I'm still watching it. Like I was talking with a friend, we were trying to figure out, as much as Dan, you and I are talking about the legal part, there is the sports part. If you have a healthy Deshaun Watson who's playing every single game of the regular season, the Cleveland Browns, by all indications, right, at least on paper, are certainly a Super Bowl contender. But I'll say it. I think we have a decent audience in Cleveland. I'll say it. On paper, they are a Super Bowl contender with Watson. But I just don't know how. I don't know how the public will react to this when I'm saying a Ray Rice scenario. A suspension is rendered, and then more stuff comes out after the fact that might.
Who do you define as the public? City of Cleveland, or are you talking about fans in Houston or San Francisco? Are you talking about the national public, or are you talking about his constituency in Cleveland? Because I could tell you from the way the Baltimore fans behaved and from the way the Pittsburgh Steelers fans conveniently forgot about the Ben Roethlisberger allegations. If Deshaun Watson is able to start games for the Cleveland Browns and wins and does very well there, they're going to be lifting them up on their shoulders. So I don't know if the court of public opinion really matters in Cleveland, because if it's your player in your city, you overlook a lot of stuff.
So I'll disagree with you there. I've spoke to a lot of people within Cleveland who are not happy with the team. So let's see. I'm sure, Dan, you're not wrong. There's going to be a certain contingency that says winning cures everything. But there's certain people that think he's a football player. People deserve second chances. There are other people that say, allegations, whatever, one strike. In my own personal mind, you're out. So I think, Dan, the people that I'm referring to are the hypothetical people that might find their way to Brown Stadium and protest the fact that Watson is there, whether from Cleveland or not. I was listening to a podcast recently. They had a Baltimore Ravens fan on, and he was saying, he's making fun of the Pittsburgh Steelers with the Roethlisberger stuff. He was making fun of now the Cleveland Browns within the same division taking a quarterback with these type of allegations. So, I think there will be a public, and maybe just the social media public, that says that the guy shouldn't be playing. But I think that's when I'm saying I'm worried about public opinion, is that there is some outcry that Watson should be sitting out. So I don't know. Again, everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but we'll see how crazy the backlash is in the court of so-called public opinion, be it in Cleveland or be it just in the other 31 NFL teams.
I really don't think it's going to matter ultimately, because when he serves a suspension, everybody's going to move on. And the city of Cleveland, there are always going to be people in any fan base who object to, the player continuing to have any affiliation with the team. You're not going to make 100% of the people satisfied. There will be outcries from certain segments. There's no question about it. But the fans, by and large, are going to accept him in Cleveland at some point. They're accepting him now. If his teammates accept him, this will move on in the news cycle to the next thing, because he was not accused. He was not charged criminally. And from a certain vantage point, or at least, from my lens, at least some part of this seems like ambulance chasing by an aggressive private civil litigation attorney.
You're not wrong. And Dan, I said it, you told to me offline, Watson fatigue is real, but listen, it's a big sports story, so we got to cover it. Okay, Dan, let's do a little bit of a curveball. How about this? We're talking about one of our sponsors of our show, Underdog Fantasy. Dan, obviously, we talked about Underdog. Those guys are the place to go with respect to daily fantasy, season-long fantasy. Use our code CONDUCT to sign up over there and get a $100 match bonus. Dan, we find ourselves with a fantasy story this week. Joc Pedersen, Tommy Pham. So, okay, let's start with this. Tommy Pham and Joc Pedersen are in a fantasy baseball league. Joc Pedersen, as people know, spent many years with the Dodgers. He finished last season with the Atlanta Braves. Multiple-time World Series winner, makes his way to the Giants. Tommy Pham has played for a number of organizations, but relevant to this story, he played with the Padres. So it seems, if you're listening to, well, I guess to the incident, during batting practice, Tommy Pham walks up to Joc Pedersen. They have some type of back and forth. Tommy Pham slaps Joc Pedersen across the face, and they had the equivalent of what would be a benches clearing incident, except it was before the game. So it was kind of like a batting practices scuffle. Who knows, right? I know the right term for it. But they asked Joc Pedersen what happens, and he essentially goes, well, we were in a fantasy league together. I put a player on the injured reserve when he was hurt, and then I added somebody, and I kept the player on the injured reserve afterwards. So he was accused, at least by some people in this fantasy baseball chat, of stashing injured players, Tommy Pham, I guess, being one of them. So I guess that's where the beef started. And then Joc Pedersen, the timeline is a little unclear, but I guess had been posting GIFs. I call them GIFs, Dan. People can make fun of me. I know I think the proper term is GIFs, but he was posting a couple images of the San Diego Padres at the time, Tommy Pham's team, collapsing under the weight of pressure. So there was images of the Dodgers, the Giants, the Padres, and a sense of the GIF or the images that the Padres were collapsing. So Tommy Pham says he slapped Pedersen from a combination of cheating in fantasy when his money was at stake. You don't want people messing with the money, making fun of the Padres, and you didn't know Pedersen that well. And then, Dan, I think here's the last element of this. As someone that's been in a lot of fantasy leagues, I've definitely stashed my fair share of players on the injured reserve. Certainly, if ESPN rules allow it, I'm going to do it. Dan, where's the commissioner in all of this? When a player gets hurt, this is an interesting kind of quirk. And they have, at least depending on your format, it says you put an asterisk, it says IR. You could put them on the version of the disabled list, and you can add a player. Now, at least on ESPN, because I do this trick all the time, which is why I sided with Joc Pedersen. If a player then is now healthy, he can remain in your injured list, even though he's healthy, if you don't add a new player. So that's kind of a sneaky way to increase your roster size. So he was stashing players. I've done the trick a million times, but the ESPN roster settings allowed, and unless the commissioner steps in, if ESPN default settings allow it, I'm going to take advantage of that rule.
Well, all of this points to the larger issue. I think we should talk about Mike Trout's involvement, but people could read the story. Trout. Yeah, people could read the story. The whole, I think, point of our discussion of this isn't to sort of, just lay out all the facts. I think most people are somewhat familiar that there was a beef between Tommy Pham and Joc Pedersen. He was, Pham slapped Pedersen over, sort of disrespecting the Padres and for, in his view, cheating at fantasy sports. And, he was suspended 3 games from Major League Baseball after, this little incident broke out. And it does raise the issue, should professional athletes be gambling on sporting events? And I think for time immemorial, there have been high stakes poker games in the back of the plane with NBA players. I remember, Charles Oakley, I think, slapped Tyrone Hill back in the 1990s for welching on a poker debt. So I think fantasy sports and maybe to some degree sports betting have replaced or supplanted the high stakes poker game in the back of the plane. And I wonder, should athletes be gambling on sporting events? And they're gonna find some activity to gamble on to sort of kill time. But this is really it does, at least in my mind, raise the issue of where the league should draw the line on whether these athletes should be participating in high stakes gambling activities.
So I was actually, it's funny you brought that up. I was thinking that if this was a dispute about fantasy baseball, would we be looking at this very differently? And I don't know the rule for baseball, but I know for football, NFL players are allowed to play fantasy football, but the NFL players are allowed to play fantasy football in their own sport, but the winnings have to be capped. I think it's a very low number. It's like in the hundreds, like 250, 500. But
the league, MLB's rule is a little different. You can gamble, you can bet on sporting events not involving baseball. So baseball players can participate in legal
fantasy baseball.
Yeah, right. No fantasy baseball, no legal betting on baseball games, but they could play fantasy and bet on NBA games as long as they're operating or doing so in a legal jurisdiction. But a couple of elements here are really, just at least in my mind, problematic, that this is a very high stakes gambling activity. And it has kind of shined a light on players, betting lots of money. And maybe it's all relative, because for players like Mike Trout, a $10,000 bet, here's the buy-in. It's $10,000 per player. And if you're last in the league, you have to kick in another $10,000. So it's really not a high stakes gamble for.
Did that come out? I hadn't seen that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for you and me, it's a high stakes league. Well, hopefully in a few years not, but for these highly compensated professional athletes, it's just a competition. It's enough money, enough skin in the game to make it interesting. But it's not about the money, but they take it so seriously that it does cloud their judgment and compel them to do things that are just sort of not exercising good judgment. Who would assault somebody in your fantasy league, in a Major League Baseball stadium, in front of fans, in front of teammates, in front of the media? These disagreements could sometimes get heated, as Charles Barkley and all the incidents that he had been involved with, slapping players in the league over perceived, gambling debts and disrespect. I mean, I think the league has to sort of come out with a much more sensible policy to make sure that these incidents don't surface publicly again.
As someone that has been the commissioner of my fair share of leagues, I have never been slapped. I'm usually more engaged in settling the disputes. The quote from Tommy Pham, we should read it. I thought it was funny. "Trout did a terrible job, man. Trout's the worst commissioner in fantasy sports," which I thought was amusing. And Dan, maybe the joke in all of this is that Tommy Pham was suspended for 3 games. He agreed to that type of suspension. He did not appeal it, but he ended up losing about $111,000 as a result of his suspension. So if that's true, Dan, that the buy-in of the league was $10,000, and Tommy Pham was upset that Joc Pedersen was messing with his money, or whatever the quote was, Tommy Pham cost himself exponentially more than the buy-in for that league. So that's why Pham gets suspended. And I'm a Giants fan. Hopefully my bias is not here, but good on Joc Pedersen. I think Joc Pedersen also said that Tommy Pham ended up leaving the league in week 4, week 5. You end up quitting the league in the middle of the year. And as someone that's been a commissioner of a number of leagues, I'm going to view that person as being in the wrong. There is no dispute that you can't work out. I think that was poor form. So I'm going to take Joc's side here.
I am as well. I mean, there's no justification for hitting a player over a dispute in fantasy sports. I mean, it does kind of create, at least for Tommy Pham, potential long-term career consequences, because now if you're a general manager of a real team, not a fantasy team, you might think twice about introducing somebody like that in your clubhouse, because he does seem, this incident portrays him as a loose cannon. And the way he was, in the interviews with the media, dropping F-bombs, it's like you might think twice about signing a player like that. So it probably portrays him as not the greatest teammate and not the best person to bring into a clubhouse. Whereas Joc Pedersen, I think, comes out of this, looking no worse for wear, other than the embarrassment of being slapped in the outfield. But that soon will pass.
Okay, Dan. I mean, we laid out, there's obviously a complex story, when a baseball player hits another player with respect to fantasy, an incident. I think, we talked about it. If this was a fantasy baseball league, it would be a much bigger story that maybe something is going on. But Dan, we are lawyers here. I think we have to help write policies. Is there anything that baseball can do or change moving forward, from this incident? What can we learn, and what can baseball do?
Yeah, a couple of days ago, I went on to Sports Grid to give a different, more extreme opinion as to what I think Major League Baseball should do going forward. I think all the leagues, and I said I think all the leagues should impose a sort of a bright line ban against players betting on sports, even if it's not their own sport, or participating in fantasy sports contests. And then a little bit afterwards, I began to sort of have doubts about the efficacy and wisdom of that proposal, because you can't treat players like children. You can't deny to them what any other American or what any other citizen can do. I think banning the gambling on their own sport is sort of where I would draw the line, because these players, they're very well compensated. This has never been about the money. There's not an integrity risk associated with baseball players having a fantasy football league. And I think the punishment here kind of fit the crime. He slapped a player, he committed an assault, he was suspended 3 games for it. But I don't think you could take fantasy sports away from athletes, particularly if it doesn't concern their own particular sport. If it's a crossover into another league, another sport, how could you tell if the Major League Baseball Players Association were presented with this kind of prohibition? I would be fighting it. I would not agree to it in collective bargaining because it poses zero integrity risk. So this is just an extension of the high stakes poker games in the back of the airplane from the 1970s and 1980s. And that has been replaced by DFS. And hopefully it doesn't cross over into more serious integrity issues by gambling on games within your own league. So I think the leagues need to really be consistent with their education and reminder to their athletes as to what the do's and don'ts are. Because as we saw with NFL, with 2 players, with I think it was Josh Ross and Calvin Ridley, you had 2 NFL players that were foolish and stupid enough to sign up in their own names at a legal sports book, not realizing that there was anything wrong with it. So it really shows how much education is necessary, even for athletes that are surrounded by attorneys, advisors, agents. There's a long way to go. And I think this is an embarrassing incident, but it's not one that requires any policy change, just a consistent application of the education of players.
The policy change might be getting a real commissioner because Mike Trout is too busy crushing baseballs. In a league with a lot of money at stake, 10,000 is a lot too many. Yeah. Probably should have lots of Tommy Pham. You should probably have someone really settling these disputes. But okay, Dan, let us move over to our third topic. That is Mr. Dan Snyder. So if you have a calendar out right now, if you're looking at your phone, I'd like you to open up the calendar app, or if you have like back in the day, like an actual physical calendar, which I used to have in my office. Circle June 22nd. Damn, that is the day that we might get Dan Snyder testifying on Capitol Hill. I know you had a lot of comments on it, but I think this was overdue. I've done a lot of hits and I've been saying, people said, what's next? And I said, what's next is Capitol Hill making a statement and putting Dan Snyder under fire and making him answer the hard-hitting questions. Dan Snyder is obviously the embattled owner of the Washington Commanders. He's hid over the years. He gives very few public statements. He hides behind litigation. He hides behind team statements. Now he's hiding behind his wife, Tanya Snyder, who is now, I think by optics purpose, taking over day-to-day handling of the team. But now Snyder is going to have to answer directly to these allegations. Dan, what are your thoughts on the news today that they are now trying to get Snyder directly? June 22nd.
I'll tell you, if you're entering June 22nd or calendaring the testimony for June 22nd, I would implore everybody in the audience not to make travel plans to go to Washington, D.C., because Dan Snyder and Roger Goodell are not going to be walking into a hornet's nest like that, facing a very one-sided Congressional House Oversight Committee that they will not emerge unscathed if they testify, because it's a no-win situation. Either they are forced to disclose information about the investigation that's going to cast both of them in a very poor light, or if they assert their attorney-client privilege, the optics of that are going to be very bad. So I'm very skeptical at this point that either will make an appearance before the committee on June 22nd. And I want to remind our audience that this is not a subpoena. This is a letter sent by the House Oversight Committee's chairpersons inviting Commissioner Roger Goodell and Dan Snyder to testify. It has no force of law. And the NFL responded today that they will respond in a timely manner. The league PR office did not say, we have every intention of appearing and participating. We'll have more information later in the week. Nowhere in the PR office's statement was any agreement to appear as a witness. So I'm skeptical that either is going to show up, and that's going to set the stage.
But let me stop you here. Why wouldn't they issue a subpoena? What would be the reason behind that? Because they're trying to save face?
I think they should have issued a subpoena a long time ago, or at least expedited, this timeline. The letter that they sent to the commissioner and to Dan Snyder today is 7 months, almost 7 months after the original investigation was launched, after months after documents were first requested, long after the stonewalling had taken place. I mean, the last time we discussed this topic on conduct detrimental, I believe was in like March or maybe early April. And I asked you then, I said, what is taking the House Oversight Committee so long to take this to the next stage, which would be subpoenaing the records? And issuing a subpoena for live testimony. I think they're trying to play nice here and just, do it consensually first, the easy way. And then if both witnesses either no show or uncooperative, I think the next stage, or at least the next gambit after that, is going to be issuing a subpoena, and non-compliance with a subpoena leads to contempt of Congress. I think ultimately, if the House Oversight Committee is going to take this to the limit, we're going to be looking at a court battle where either the Commanders, Dan Snyder, or the NFL could launch a lawsuit questioning the authority of this congressional committee to perform, non-legislative functions and essentially act as a law enforcement agency or an executive branch agency. I think there are some really close questions here as to the powers and limits of the authority of the Oversight Committee to essentially investigate the Washington Commanders' workplace situation. So I think the league and the Commanders aren't going to put themselves in a position where they're going to look bad by issuing, privileged and confidential and saying nothing versus saying something and potentially creating a far worse situation by cooperating and giving up the kind of information that the league has been trying to hide, all this time. I mean, they never asked Beth Wilkinson to publish a report. Everything was kept under a lid. And given the NFL's stance here and Snyder's stance, they're not going to volunteer this information, the same information they've been trying to conceal, simply because they're invited to testify. So they're either going to resist or say nothing.
I don't really have much to add. I mean, I looked at the commander statements. They're saying that they're going to respond in kind. I'd like to think, we do want to believe our billionaire owners, that if you really have nothing to hide, you would be willing to testify. But any lawyer with half a brain would tell you there's much more harm than good that can come from that scenario. But we'll see. We'll see what comes in advance of June 22nd. That's really a couple of weeks away, Dan.
But they do have something to hide.
Well, they certainly have something to hide. But, and I will say this, Dan, is, I think our last big sports figure that was called in front of these politicians was Mark Emmert for the NCAA during the NIL hearings. And he was hit pretty hard, but he didn't have the type of, we're going to say, alleged skeletons in his closet that Dan Snyder did. He had, incompetent and stealing money from players. He didn't have sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations. So, there's sometimes no right way to answer those. And Dan, we talked about it, these ugly allegations with Johnny Depp, Deshaun Watson. In this day and age, and we talked about it a little bit on our last show together with Rusty Hardin. We are a show, and we should say it. We should probably repeat it every show. Innocent until proven guilty is the standard. It's someone's burden to prove those cases, right? Deshaun Watson, we're talking about allegations, but Rusty Hardin, we talked about the last time we talked about Deshaun Watson, has kind of said in this day and age, when you are accused of something, social media would basically paint you as having done it, and you have to kind of prove that you didn't. So, we talked about Deshaun Watson, we talked about Johnny Depp. I think Dan Snyder, if his lawyers were ever given a public statement, they'd probably say something similar. It's the burden is not on us to prove that we didn't do something, but that's what it's going to be like if we go up on Capitol Hill. We're going to be, treated as if we are an offender when we should be presumed innocent.
Well, there are not going to be any charges. This is just simply a committee investigation of the sort of the workplace culture of the Washington Commanders without any possible charges looming in the distance.
No, but there is an allegation made specifically against Snyder. So there are charges, right? And then there's the court of public opinion that can charge you.
The NFL and Dan Snyder have to pay close attention to what's taking place in Nevada. There's a discovery process that now will move forward at some point in the John Gruden lawsuit that has a close nexus to what's going on in this congressional investigation. And what the league and Dan Snyder have been known for the last 7 months is stonewalling Congress. Do you think 7 months after stonewalling Congress and not willing to turn over any documents, or at least not giving them the documents that Congress is looking for, that a simple invitation to appear that is below the line of a subpoena is going to compel their attendance? Of course it's not. Either they'll show up and assert the attorney-client privilege, or decline the invitation to appear, which will then transition into the next legal frontier, which is Congress issuing subpoenas for documents and live witness testimony, which then I think would set up the next phase of this battleground, which could be a lawsuit over the discoverability and admissibility of these documents in a congressional investigation. Because does the attorney-client privilege which is what the league and Snyder are hiding behind, does that even apply in a congressional investigation? I think ultimately this is going to be resolved. It'll either be resolved in a federal district court, or the clock is going to run out on the Democrats in the House of Representatives. And if there is a changing of the guard after the 2022 general election, I think that this investigation is going to grind to a halt, because you're already hearing the Republican members of Congress decrying this investigation. So this is a very political battle. And right now we're only 5-6 months away from the general election. It's possible that the league and Dan Snyder and the Washington Commanders could basically run out the clock here through more stonewalling, followed by litigation.
Let's put a pin in the Dan Snyder conversation. We'll obviously keep tabs on that. It's a story that's not going away. There's obviously some updates we're monitoring on the stadium relocation front. So maybe, Dan, that's perhaps some of the reason why this is popping up now. But we'll keep an eye on it. Before we move on, I have one thing to add. A reminder, our show is sponsored by Themis Bar Review, the top bar prep company in the galaxy.
They're doing it differently. As people have been hearing more and more about Themis, that's maybe not just us, that's just Themis doing it differently and bringing an exciting new approach to bar prep. So definitely check out Themis.
Go to themisbar.com/con detrimental. Dan, the other story, which we'll try to hit, I think, in our next episode, the story that John Nucci helped us cover once upon a time. The Saudi Golf League is now launching, and they've announced their roster. A bunch of names that people will know. They're handing out the bag, so to speak. One name that is very big, the number 13th ranked golfer in the entire world, Dustin Johnson, and a surprise addition to that roster. So we'll see. I've already seen some reports that Dustin Johnson is losing some sponsorships over his affiliation with the Saudi Golf League. Dan, any comments to add on that front? It's a story I think we should monitor, but no brewing litigation as of yet.
I mean, he was guaranteed $100 million plus. I think he weighed the risk of losing sponsorships versus $100 million, whatever that dollar amount was to be promised, 9 figures. I think the loss of sponsorships in the short term is a small price to pay for him. And it really does going forward. The ball is in the PGA's court. What is the PGA going to do about it? Because they've been threatening to ban any player from their golf tournaments who participate in this Saudi sponsored league. And
you know what that sounds like, Dan? It sounds like a group boycott, if you ask me.
I think this is definitely setting the stage for litigation at some point. I mean, the PGA is supposed to be not for profit, and it raises some antitrust issues. And I think that's ultimately where this is headed, whether or not it involves this golfer or some other golfer. But if the PGA continues to insist that any player who plays in the Saudi league will face a ban, you can bet there'll be an antitrust lawsuit filed at some point, and then we'll be able to devote an entire episode to the issue.
Well said, Dan. I think we can put this episode in the books. Certainly a bunch of good topics. Thank you to Joc Pedersen for providing us with a assault/fantasy football story, or Tommy Pham. Dan, I think that's about it. Anything to add before we put this episode in the books? You're forgetting one thing, Dan. Let's go Rangers. How about that?
I'm very thankful that the Rangers are playing hockey in the month of June. The last time that happened, I believe, might have been 1994. So that could be a good omen. I think the last time the Rangers were in the semis, no, they were in the semis when they got knocked out by Tampa. That was May. No, they played in the 2014 Stanley Cup Finals in June. So it's so refreshing to watch Ranger hockey in the month of June. So win or lose, I don't believe we're playing with house money, but this is just so exciting to be able to experience potentially 7 more games.
Hey, Dan, what's your official prediction in the Rangers Lightning series?
If I could predict Tampa.
No. There was a requirement here.
Yeah, I think the Rangers are going to meet their match because the Tampa Bay Lightning are the defending Stanley Cup champions. They still have so many of their core players in their prime, and the goaltending advantage that the Rangers have enjoyed against Pittsburgh and Carolina. I think it becomes like a wash in the conference finals because Tampa has a goalie that's close to being the equal, and in some people's opinions, maybe even better than Shesterkin. I think Shesterkin's the best in the league, but the margin of difference between him and Vasilevsky is so slight that I don't think the Rangers are going to ultimately win the battle of attrition in goal like they did in the Pittsburgh and Carolina series. So I think it's Tampa in 6.
You heard it here. Dan Wallach has, for the 3rd time in a row, picked against the Rangers. Dan, here's my analysis. New York Rangers, team of destiny. Let's go Rangers. Let's end the pod here, Dan. Let's end on that note. Yeah. Maybe we'll make a friendly wager between you and I. Dan, I think that'll end it.
Yep.
And we'll see everyone next time on another episode of Conduct Detrimental.